navigating this tricky space in COVID and in going through this great awakening where people are actually engaging in conversations like this, where 2 years ago, I would say a lot of people were not ready to engage in this conversation. So thank you for not only the work that you do every day, but thank you for the boldness and the courageousness to engage in this work and take that first step forward. And I will tell you, none of us are perfect in this work. Every day we all, struggle with, should we do it this way? Should we say it this way in this ever-changing world? But it starts with having conversations like this and then moving from these type of conversations to actions and having this network of people that we can lean on to really help push us forward. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. And obviously you saw the conversation that me and Jim and Eloise had, and just thoughts, ideas, next steps. Let's dig into it. You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. Thank you for that, Connie. So I'll just jump in and I'll again, as we dig into this conversation, if you have questions, just feel free to unmute, jump in, put it in the chat, we'll dig in. And one of the things that I'll tell y'all from the beginning, I like to talk. So you're gonna have to excuse me. If you don't talk, I will. Simply because I'm just passionate about this work.
Dr. Gibbs, I was wondering, because when we did our introduction, like, we had a lot of people on the different levels. So some people have been on this anti-racist journey for years. Some people have just been introduced to it. So I think one thing that might be helpful are, like, what are some practical things that educators can do that might be on the beginning level, might be in the intermediate level, but some things they can start instituting maybe next week or pretty soon to kind of have an impact.
Absolutely. So, and that's one of the things I was saying from the beginning. As we dig into this work, we know that we're all at different levels. So let's say this is step one for you. This is, hey, I don't consider myself, have never been racist, but I've never just stepped out and, called white supremacy, anti-LGBT, homophobic. I've never just stepped out and stepped in the lane. So step one is really just beginning to finding a network of people. One of the things that I tell everyone, when we talk about anti-racist education, anti-racist instruction, I don't want you to think this is a black or white issue. And that's one of the things that I tell everybody. If you just look at it as from a lens of black and white, your focus is just too narrow. Because when we talk about anti-racist, we just talk about when people are not allowing people to be uniquely themselves. So this can be in a lens of being misogynistic. It can be homophobic. So anything that is not allowing somebody to be uniquely themselves, this is the thought process, and that's the conversation that we're getting ready to have. And this is dealing with your students as well as your colleagues. So when we talk about just some groundbreaking first steps, if this is your introduction into the work, I'll tell you a couple things. One, we talked about it already. Build yourself a network. And when I say build yourself a network, this has to be a trusted network where you can, one, ask questions and feel okay and feel vulnerable to just say certain things that may not be politically correct, but that's part of learning. So, like, I don't know what offends someone unless I can have a conversation with somebody in that group and I find out if it's offensive. It's that thought process of saying, I don't think I should call Ricky a bald head black guy, but you ask a bunch of white women that have long hair and they say, oh, that would be offensive to him. Well, it's not offensive to me. I'm a bald head black guy. So it's one of those things, like, you have to have conversations with people that don't look like you, that don't have the same background as you, to begin to find out if something is truly offensive. So by not going to the source and not creating that network of people, we won't get to where we want to be. Once you have that network of people, then it's about taking small but bold steps. And I want to emphasize that because as you're getting into this work and you'll begin to hear people talk about being an ally, being an ally, helping, standing with someone so that they can truly live out their truth. So when we talk about being an ally in this work, uh, that's those small steps when we say, if we see injustice happening, if we see someone being wronged, we stand up and stand with them. Now, I will tell you, and I'm probably the most politically incorrect person that you'll talk to this morning. So I tell people I'm politically correct, but yet so correct. We all have to understand that when we take this step, we put ourselves at jeopardy. And that's the scary part. That's the scary part of doing any anti-racist work, any work when you stand up for the less fortunate, you stand up for the disenfranchised, you run the risk of ostracizing yourself, pissing off people that look like you, that have the same privilege as you, that have just the same status as you when you defend the less fortunate. And sometimes that's can put ourselves at risk in things of our nature with our own status and our own background. So one of the things that I tell people, you don't have to be Dr. Martin Luther King. You don't have to be Malcolm X. You don't have to be Minister Farrakhan to make change. Take it at your own pace. It could be something as simple as Lindsay sees that Lemuel is being pushed off to the side, and every time Lemuel is in team planning, he has an idea about how to make something culturally relevant to his students, and everybody's just shunning Lemuel to the side. Lindsay may step up and say, hey, I had a conversation with Lemuel, and this is something that I heard him say, and this is something that we can really take and really move us forward. And sometimes it's simple as just having someone else stand with somebody on an idea that gives that idea credence and begins to give that idea power to help move something forward. That's not, Lindsay's not standing in front of everybody and saying, hey, if we don't listen to Lemuel, I'm out of here. I'm not going to accept this. This is racism. This is bigotry. I'm out of here. Well, she needs her job too. So it's about taking small baby steps in this work. And if enough of us take these steps forward, we can begin to make those trickles that eventually become waves that makes that powerful movement to truly open up the thought processes of others. Because in this work of anti-racist education, it's not about changing anybody's mindset. If Katie doesn't like me, I can't change my mindset. I can't change Katie's mindset about that. But what I can do is just consistently give Katie information that challenges her thought process that will ultimately, we would hope that it ultimately makes her think critically and think deeply. And that's how we're going to change the next generation. So when we talk about how this work hits our students, anti-racist work isn't about pushing an agenda. It's not pushing propaganda. It's truly about how are we challenging our students to think critically, think openly, so that we're not, as MLK famously coined, we're not judging people based upon the color of their skin, but ultimately based upon the content of their character. And in this world that we're living in, we take that a little deeper and say not based upon the color of their skin or about who Ricky chooses to love or who Joel chooses to love or who Mary chooses to love. It's about how they're treating people as we dig into this work.
I think you got a question over here, Dr. Gibbs. That's great.
Hi, Dr. Gibbs. My name's Judah. And I am a person of color educator in a primarily white space. It is considered like a white liberal space, but in situations where I have voiced concerns over the texts that we read or advocating for people of color books to be represented, I have been oftentimes shut down.
Mm.
Um, so I'm wondering, like, what your advice then would be to take care of, yes, the students and make sure they read diverse texts and that they see diverse voices, but also take care of myself as a
Yeah,
diverse voice in that space. So.
absolutely. So one of the things that I've often told people, as someone who I tell everybody may not know, but I taught third grade. So being a elementary third grade teacher, we all know elementary is dominated female, mostly white female, but definitely female. So I was one of just a couple males on the staff. So being in that space can be very tricky. And then when we start talking about education in itself, education is built on middle class white values. If we look at just the fundamental beliefs and how education was built, education is built to teach middle class white values. So when we start talking about how do we bring in text, especially when we're at that space of the classroom teacher, so we're not quote unquote, even though, again, politically incorrect guy, but yet so correct. Everybody says that the teacher is the most important person in the building. The teacher's providing all the instruction, but we don't allow teachers to create or make the curriculum decisions around text. And obviously, to protect yourself, and I'm always tell you, remember I told you this work is hard. That's why you have to have that trusted network. But also, don't I tell everybody, don't be a fool. Like we want to make change in this world, but you can't make that change from the outside. You have to be on the inside to truly make change. So when you're protecting yourself, obviously we have our text that we have to use, but the way that you can begin to push the envelope, challenge the status quo, is by having those conversations with the leaders or whatever in the school building, but also finding ways to highlight or bring in other things to a text. I'm gonna use a generic example, but it'll make sense in the grand scheme. So let's say I'm reading um, a book on the Titanic. It's Titanic, we saw the movie, white guy, white girl, boat, all that good stuff. But there were people of color on that boat as well. So as we find stories, as we find texts, as we want to be intentional about what we highlight, we find ways that we can find those people of color and tell their stories. And in that, not only do we begin to highlight that the society isn't just an all-white society, it's not an all what we consider straight society, things of that nature. We have people of color, we have people that love a different way, we have people that believe in different ways. We begin to highlight those things, and then in that we begin to highlight not only culture, we can highlight beliefs, and then we find ways to just take what looked as if it was going to be an instruction that was based on just colonial beliefs, and begin to expand those into ideas where we can show how people whose voices have been muted over time, and show the contributions that they were having. So that's one of the things that I would say, because when we look into the work, especially when we talk about curriculum sometimes puts us, especially classroom teachers, into just tight spaces. But the beauty of being that classroom teacher, and you all have said it, you wouldn't say it in front of your principal. You ain't planning, y'all plan these lessons, and in your mind, when I get to my room, I'm gonna close my door. I'm gonna teach it the way I want to teach it anyway. So when you have that space, you have that autonomy as that classroom teacher, once you have that text, you have the standards that you want to hit, find ways to infuse your personality, your excitement, your thought process of wanting to make sure that everybody's represented, and just find those unique ways to bring it in.
Thank you. Just to clarify, my principal does let me teach anything, and I do
Yeah.
teach like American-born Chinese at the beginning of the year, and we're in like Marie Lou's Legend, and then we'll hit All American Boys at the end. But
Yeah.
I think it's more the question: how do I convince the other people in the English department to teach diverse text?
So that and part of that thought process is, and we've seen it happen over and over, when other educators start seeing other scholars have fun with something, we tend to be like, okay, well, what are you doing? Like, why is that happening? So why is everybody's having so much fun over there? So part of, and that's the exciting part of, digging into a conversation like this, and being surrounded around people that have that like mindset, you begin to just get energy from each other. And if my child is in your class, and as a parent, we're having so much fun, my kid is having so much fun. Now, as parents, I'm having conversations, and I have conversations with Claire. And if Claire is in Claire's child is in Chris' class, Claire's starting to have that conversation like, well, why isn't my child learning like this? So continue to push the envelope forward, continue to do the work, and then your work will begin to inspire others.
And if I can just direct your attention to the chat, Dr. Gibbs, I think that Connie had dropped in there that, let's see, this reminds me, if I can read, that reminds me of how Titus Kaplar shifts the gaze using art highlighting people in the background that have been impressed. And I really, really love that idea of bringing it to highlight people so you can also uplift them and put them on a pedestal in a positive way.
Yep. So definitely when you see, and that's what anti-racist is about, because when we had structures that silence voices, that silence the group of people based upon how they look, how they love, how they believe, it's going to take us, the ones who don't necessarily look like each other, don't necessarily love how each other loves, don't necessarily believe how each other believes, but understand that we are all in this space together, and it's a space that we want to make sure that we continue to push forward. And I saw the 60 seconds, so I'll begin to wrap up. So as I leave out of this room and close out, I'm gonna tell you, continue to push forward, continue to do the hard work, continue to ask the hard questions, continue to lead by example, because as educators, you'll be the ones that push the envelope forward to open up this realm of anti-racist space, to allow everyone to live how they live, love how they love, grow how they grow, but most importantly, learn how they learn. So thank you for doing this work. Thank you for moving forward. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbs, so much.
Gibbs, anytime now. Here comes Jenna.
Hello, hello. We've been whisked away magically from one room to the next. It really was magical too. It was pretty awesome. So we have sitting before us Dr. Ricky Gibbs. You all have already had your opportunity to your introduction, so we don't have to get into that. But Dr. Gibbs is the head principal at Warner Arts Magnet Elementary School right here in Nashville. And I'll give Dr. Gibbs the rest of the time.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, so good morning to everyone. I'm looking forward to engaging with you this morning, just to hear your thought process. If you have any questions, I'll love to kind of just push the conversation forward before I open it up to you all and begin taking those questions and us dig into topics. I want to start by just saying thank you. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for engaging in this critical, life-changing work. Because if in the anti-racism space, it's requiring to have allies to really move this work forward. Because one of the things that I often tell people when it comes to anti-racist work, anti-Semitic work, anti-homophobic work, it all aligns together. If I could make everyone not be racist as a Black man, it would have already been done. If Black folks could do that, it would already be done. If we can make the whole world be not homophobic, well, people in the LGBTQ community would have already made that happen. It takes people who are not a part of a certain community, who are not a part of a certain race, who don't believe the same way we believe, to become an ally, stand side by side, and help push the conversation forward, push the thought process forward, begin to open minds, because ultimately the beauty and the goal of anti-racist work is by having different people who are not in certain circles begin to have conversations. And it's one of the thought processes is a quote that my mentor always tells me is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And it's one of the thought processes is, as we dig into this anti-racist work, I can't sit at the same table Eli sits at. I don't have access to sit at the same table Mary sits at. And if I'm not at that table, then I'm on the menu. But because Eli is at that table, because Mary is at that table, they can represent me and they can ensure my voice is heard. And that's the thought process as we dig into this work. So I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna open it up. Love to take questions, thought processes. You watch the videos. If I can expand on something that was said, this is the time that we'll do it.
And please don't be shy. Jump in there with all your questions. Please do.
I want to say thanks again, Dr. Gibbs, Ricky, as you told us to call you.
Hey, there you go.
This is,
My mama named me Ricky.
the third or fourth time I've gotten to be on a call like this with you, and each time you push me to think further and to act more. So I really appreciate you being with us today, and to have the opportunity to speak with you and with everybody here. One of the things that you said in the call that really jumped out at me was how centering students is a really powerful tool to use for anti-racist teaching and for the other kind of intersectional issues you just brought up, and how a lot of times, like, we learn about centering student voice and using inquiry in the classroom just as like an abstract teaching tool, but seeing it from the lens of, oh no, it's so much more than that. And it's kind of pushed me to think, especially lately, because I remember your quote from your mentor too. It's like thinking about like who's on my menu, who's on my menu, and that's a really uncomfortable thought, but it's a true one. And when I do that, it changes the way that I see the context of teaching, and it makes me act differently in that context, because then suddenly I'm looking at the menu and I'm like, no, that's not how I want to act in this system. And I can make some changes in that and think about ways to center student voice and to value their experiences and perspectives and make that a part of class. And really the question that I have for you is it's just out of personal interest. Is I've had the opportunity to actually go to Warner for an ed camp, and it was amazing to see the space and how things operate there. And we're neighbors in East Nashville too, so from Bed Episcopal School. And I was just curious, you've put in so much work in making that particular environment a place where students are loved and thrive, that I wonder how you see pushing that boundary, that space, like outside of the school. They come into the school and they have a certain experience, but like, how do you make the boundary where they're valued as people push farther and farther and farther and farther out? And I'm just curious, because I don't know, like, after they leave Warner, what's the next step for most of your students?
Man, that's actually a great question, and it actually gives me an opportunity to kind of just give you more context and insight, and just the total belief and why I'm passionate about instruction and education and changing lives through the power of great education, but also how I connected with this anti-racist work, and talk about removing those barriers. So for some of you that don't know, Warner's a school that sits in the middle of East Nashville. Historically, has been 99% African American, but we sit in the middle of a zip code 37206 that's 66% white. So how does a school become 99% African American in a zip code that's 66% white? So when we begin to talk about how we isolate and separate folks, that became just a construct of that community. And we've done some things over the last 2 years to dismantle those type of systems. But also one of the things that we built as our core tenet, our core philosophy, as educators, and I'm sure you all have heard this lie, and I tell people it is the biggest lie ever told in education. And and you're gonna smile when I say it, because I know you've heard it. When we're working with students, we only should focus on what happens between the four walls of our school building, because we can't control what happens in the neighborhood. And so it doesn't matter what neighborhood they come from. When they step inside our school, we control the four walls and we create that atmosphere. And that's what Tyree was talking about. So we created this euphoria of a place inside those four walls, but all of our students leave those four walls eventually. And that's why I say it's the biggest lie to ever be told in education, because as educators, especially educators who are passionate about anti-racism work, we have to expand beyond those four walls. We have to take this work into the community. And as we built this work out, one of the things that I've pushed, and we fundamentally believe in that environment, is if our boys and girls can be educated together inside the school building, it's incumbent upon me as a principal, us as educators, especially educators who are about anti-racism work, to find ways that we're connecting those same families of those boys and girls who are educated inside our building, to connect them outside of the building. Because what we found is we have a large population of our boys and girls that live in Casey Homes. Casey Homes is the largest public housing complex in the city of Nashville. But also because of gentrification, and to say the median household income in Casey is $12,000 a year. So you have families you have mothers, fathers raising families of 4, 5, 6 people off of $12,000 a year. But because of gentrification, we also have boys and girls at our school that live in homes off of Russell Street, off of Fatherland, and those homes cost $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. So you have a huge wealth gap. But the beautiful thing of anti-racism instruction, and if we do this work and do this work right, this work isn't about preaching some type of, and I tell people, because I've heard people say, well, anti-racism work is a liberal concept that people are just trying to push. It has nothing to even do with politics. Anti-racism work has nothing to do with politics. It's about enlightenment. It's about challenging people to think differently, to think critically. And one of the things that when we're educating, especially young people, if we just challenge them to say, I just want you to think, and we put them into a room and say, it doesn't matter if they're white, black, Hispanic, Kurdish, Native American, they're going to all gravitate to anybody that's just trying to have fun. They don't care about how they look. They don't care about who you love. They just want to be around other people who want to have fun. And so, and that's what this work is all about. How can you challenge people's thought process to open their minds, so when we expand from that school building into that community, when we take parents who earn $12,000 a year, or parents who are earning almost $500,000 a year, and open their mind and say, your children are engaging, your children are loving. Now let's challenge your thought process, and what can you do? How do you challenge some of the beliefs that you have to make sure that we're standing up and opening the doors for others? So as we've dug into the work to push out into the community, that's how we've thought about it, being intentional about how we're connecting families, being intentional to connect families that don't look like each other, that don't love like each other, that don't believe religiously like each other, and begin to put them in the same setting to show, when you strip all of the cosmetic things away, we're all part of the human race. We're all humankind. And one of the things that we fundamentally believe is that everybody on this earth is human, but not everybody is kind. So we need to get back to connecting those two pieces together to make that humankind. And that's one of the thought process as we push anti-racism work, anti-Semitic work, that we begin to put people in a setting where we have to interact, and especially if we build it off of the backs of the love of our children, we've seen those doors begin to open for others.
Yeah, that's powerful, Dr. Gibbs. So you use the relationship that you build in the school with the students among themselves as a catalyst to connect the families as a larger group,
Yep.
right? Wow, that's deep.
Yeah. So, because one of the things that I'll tell everybody as we push into this anti-racism work, the beautiful thing of starting in education is, so I have my great grandma. She's 90 years old. She's lived her life. I could talk to her about, hey grandma, we love who we love. Like, we can date interracially. If I see another man that I love, hey, I can love him and I can get married to him. I can live whatever life I want to live. My great grandma would be like, well, baby, that's just not the way that things were when I was your age, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with them. So, but that's her belief. But the beautiful thing about education is we have the power to begin to open minds at an early age that are not set in their ways. We have the power to begin to shape what this utopia of a society should look like. And that's what I tell people all the time when people try to I'm just a classroom teacher. No, you're the most powerful person in this world. You have the ability to shape everybody. So by challenging people to open their thought process, challenging our young people to look beyond how somebody looked, to look beyond about who loves who, and just challenge them to think critically and to have an open mind about everybody that they come in contact with. That's how we truly begin to push this anti-racism work forward. And we begin to push just not only thought process, but the enlightenment period forward as well. Come on, Mary.
Dr. Gibbs, good morning or afternoon,
morning.
probably by
Hey,
now.
it just crossed over.
Yeah. I wondered if you had any examples of things you've done or tried with parents outside, the school, that you think are successful, or ones that weren't, and you would want to steer clear of.
Yeah. So one of the simple things we've done to just get it to understanding of cultures, and I know a lot of our EL schools tend to do it, is when we have cultural celebrations. Now, the caveat, because of COVID, I love you, Mary, but I'm not trying, we're not tight. So like, I probably won't eat any food you brought to me right now, and vice versa. I could bring So I'm originally from Miami, so I can make shrimp and grits and macaroni and cheese and all this stuff. I could bring it. You'd be like, yeah, you made that from your house. Nah, COVID kind of have thrown us off a little bit. But when we have opportunities to highlight people's culture, to highlight people's beliefs, and if it's doing it with children as well as adults, you begin to see people come with a sense of pride. There's something about being able to say, this is who I am, and this is how this is uniquely my family, this is my heritage, that we begin to give people pride, and we begin to actually bringing people together. And what we realize is, because of how education is built, we are built in an immersion system. So no matter who we are and who our families are, when we come to the school, we are immersed into American ideology. We're immersed into what school should look like. We're immersed into, you should sit in your seat straight up with your back and your pencil on your desk and your hands. So we're immersed into this belief of what school should look like. But when we create opportunities for people to show who they are, where they're from, you begin to not only give them more pride in themselves, and they can be confident in their abilities, but you also, even intentional or unintentionally, you tell them, I value who you are. I value where you come from. And when we think about racism and bigotry, it's built on belittling others. So by setting the stage for other people to feel valued, to feel confident, and to have pride in who they are and where they come from, you set the stage. And that's just a solid strategy of a cultural night, a cultural event, something that goes beyond just writing a research paper. Because if I write a research paper, you as my teacher, you're the only person that reads it. But if I can dress up and come and talk to the class and tell them about, who I am, what I did growing up in Miami, how what makes my family unique. Now you've just given me a pride point to say, Ricky, I value who you are. So a simple strategy like that will go a long way in pushing the work.
We're coming up on our last couple of seconds. Any last question for Dr. Gibbs? Ricky, I'm sorry.
Sorry, will you just say hey to Nehemiah for me real quick?
Yeah,
I saw him.
Nehemiah. Yeah, he's gone now. Of course, he came in the most inopportune time.
I'd say he want to get some time to shine too.
He really did, which is fine with me. That's awesome. Here you go. Come here.
So before I get out of here, one of the things that I'll tell you, and I hit on it when I first came in.
The Flatlander tourist comes up to the aged Vermonter and says, oh, wow, you lived your whole life in Vermont? And he says, not yet. All right. Jim, have you spent your whole life in anti-racist stuff? Not yet.
Look, it happened to Jim, same thing. I was mid-sentence and making a closing point. Hey, good morning, and thank you for having me. I guess I'm pulling up the rear with your group, so hopefully I'm able to live up to Ms. Freeman and Jim and all the insight and glory that they've been able to share with you. My name is Ricky Gibbs. I have the honor and privilege of serving as principal at Warner Arts Magnet Elementary, located in Nashville, in the heart of East Nashville. And I want to say thank you for being with us this morning, and thank you for taking that first step. Some of you are probably already deep into anti-racism work. Some of you, this is just the beginning of the journey. And no matter where you are in the journey, I just want to say thank you. Because as someone, obviously, I don't look like most people on this call. I would venture to guess, unless you're from Miami, nobody's from Miami. Nah, so I didn't grow up the same way as anybody on this call. I would venture to guess I'm probably the only person on the call that got kicked out of school and everything else. So it's one of the things that I tell people in this work. It requires allies. It requires people that don't look like you, that don't love like you, that don't believe like you, to stand side by side with you in this work. I have some thoughts that I want to share out, but as Jenna and Lemuel could tell you, I'm a talker. If you have never heard my story, I proudly tell everybody I was captain of the debate team growing up. So if you don't want to talk, I promise you I could fill up the whole conversation, but I do want to open it up for questions of thought processes, of things you saw on the pre-recorded session, or even conversations that have come up with Ms. Freeman or Jim, that I can just give some different insights as a practitioner to talk about some practical next steps.
Please don't be shy. Jump in.
No, Anna Claire, I was going to ask you to bring in your question, but just to give Dr. Gibbs a little context, a lot of people on this call are elementary teachers. So they do work with the lower elementary grades. And so I think a lot of your responses to the questions will be really helpful, knowing your role. Anna Claire asked a really great question to Dr. Lowen in the last session, and I asked her if she could resurface it here. So I'm going to toss it to her if she could, because I'd love your response.
Perfect.
Sure. Thank you. So nice to finally meet you. I've listened to you on different podcasts and many things. So thanks for being here.
Awesome.
Thank you. So I actually work in the middle school environment, but I think this applies to every level of learning and conversation that you would have even around a dinner table. But in the context where I teach, I would say the majority of our students are white, perhaps 30-ish% are persons of color. And I just am aware of the load that a person of color has to carry. I don't know it, but I just think about it a lot when they are in a classroom or around a dinner table and people are talking about history or about race or anything. And so I guess one of the things I think we are all wondering, and the lower school is really well represented here, how do we teach, our anti-racist teaching that does deal with issues of very painful issues for our students of color, and maybe some for our white students, but how do we do that in a way that that makes it feel safe for our students of color? Heather, I don't know if that's really what I asked before. You might want to add into that.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
go ahead. What were you going to say, Heather?
go ahead. I think she did it well, but a lot of us on the call are white teachers, and we work with we have white peers who want to do this anti-racist work, but are also sensitive to how our students of color might be feeling in the classroom. So
yeah, and so I'm gonna take a stab at it and tell me if I'm floating around the right area. If not, we'll refine and we can dig into it some more. So one of the things that I will tell you, and it's something that I've shared with another group, and it's part of just how our country has moved. We have put the thought process, and that's why I'm so excited to see all of you this morning. We have put the thought process on dismantling racism on the backs of Blacks or minorities for our entire history. And part of the civil rights movement, things of that nature. And if this was an issue that Black people could resolve, it would have already been resolved. We would have done it when Dr. Martin Luther King marched on Washington. It would have already been resolved. The same concept of, as we began to talk about LGBTQ thought processes and lifestyle, if the LGBTQ community could make everybody not be homophobic, they would have already done it, because that they want to live in a society where everyone's loved. So it requires people that don't look like us, that don't believe like us, that don't love like us, to stand side by side with us in this fight. And that's what makes this conversation powerful this morning. Now let's take it to the elementary tier or even the middle school tier, and about how do we push this work in a way that makes not only our students of color feel comfortable, but then also their white colleagues, their white peers who, and I would tell people in the majority of cases, just want to play and have fun with them. Hate is not something that's innate. Hate is taught. Hate is a taught behavior. Bigotry is a taught behavior. Racism is a taught behavior. So to be homophobic is something that's a taught behavior. So it's really about setting the stage for everybody to just open up and think critically. So when we're talking about some of our younger learners, one of the things that I shared with one of the other groups, how do you find ways to show young people that they matter and their culture matters? So often, most of the history we teach is taught from an Anglo-Saxon perspective. To the victor goes the spoils. So when history books were written, they're written in a way to tell the story that the people who wrote the books want to write them. If you ask a Native American about the story of Columbus, they're not going to tell you that Columbus sailed the sea and came to America and made this great thing. They're going to tell you a different perspective, but that's not the perspective that we teach. So how can you find ways that the boys and girls in your classes can show their culture, show their beliefs? And one of the things that we talk about, just a practical strategy, we've seen it we've seen it done for thousands, hundreds of years in education. The old famous book report, tell me about your life, tell me about your family. And it's one that, we've always written it and gave it to the teacher. In current days, we've even started, putting it on the little poster board paper and bringing the poster boards in. But how can we take that to the next level? How can we push students to dress in their native garment? So when a child walks in with the hijab on, it's not 10 years ago walking in with a hijab would have been like, why are you wearing that? Now it's becoming more common. So how can we challenge students to be uniquely themselves without trying to immerse themselves into what we consider American school? So when we talk about how we're digging into this work, create opportunities for students to highlight their culture, to highlight their beliefs, highlight where their family comes from. And when we do that, not only having it where the child does it, but how can we create a path where their parents can come in and be a part of that? Because now we're building community. Now we're building, now we're showing not only the boys and girls that they matter, but your parents matter. And when we begin to bring the parents into the fold, now we have a true sense of truly digging deep into anti-racism instruction, because we know children, in their sense of being, they want to be around everybody. They don't care how you look, how you laugh, how you love. They just want to be around each other. But as adults, we have certain biases that we've learned over the years. But when we begin to bring them into the fold and we see how our children are loving and laughing with others, now we've impacted not only the child at the school, but now we've actually impacted the conversation at the dinner table. And that's how we're going to truly push the envelope, by hitting at the student perspective, the child perspective, but then bringing in the parents, so we can not only impact the perspective at school, but we can also impact the perspective at the dinner table.
I was just thinking about how, so many challenges with our world in the last year. But the one thing that Zoom allows is for some of our families to be present in the classroom. Let's say we have the all about me day that's taken to the next level. Well, the parent who can't get off work to come, I mean, it's a total luxury to be able to come into your child's school during your work hours. But we could put them on the desk and have kids ask them questions, or other parents who are able to come in. So I was just thinking like, there are some ways to go to, because I found that sometimes it's hard for all of our parents to be present in the classroom, and that breaks their heart. But maybe Zoom will allow for that.
Yep, I would agree, and it definitely sets the stage to allow for us to do certain things that we normally would have, been nervous about when it comes to technology and bringing in videos and things of that nature. So it definitely has set the stage for us to be able to engage in a totally different way. I want to pull up something that I just saw dropped into the chat about the frustrations. I think Mary, let me go back to the chat. I closed it out. Maria,
I'll read it to you. I
Maria,
get
I
confused and
apologize.
frustrated
Oh,
when I
go
hear
ahead.
adults/parents claim that school is indoctrinating the children by speaking these truths. Indoctrinating.
So one of the things that I tell everybody, it's something that when we hear that, not only frustrates you, it frustrates me to no end. Because again, when we talk about anti-racist work or anti-racism work, people begin to put it under the political perspective of this has to be a liberal idea. This is that. One of the ways you combat that, and I tell everybody, I use one of the quotes from Dr. King when Dr. King discussed the true essence of education is truly about enlightenment. It's about challenging the thought process of others. It's about finding ways to push people's thinking, and that's what this work is all about. It's not about indoctrinating anybody. It's not, and that's one of the first things I told you. It's not about pushing an agenda, and that's how people who don't want the work furthered, they begin to distract you with what I call the noise. They want to distract you and pull you into the battles that we see are being fought on other fronts all the time, to say, well, this is something that the liberal left wants to do, or this is something that the radical right wants to do. No, if you were just a good person, if you're a part of the humankind, you should want to see someone else have every opportunity that you have. You shouldn't want to have an advantage because you're a white female. You shouldn't want to have an advantage because you're a black male. We want everybody to have the same opportunities that everyone else has. One of the thought process, and it just connects everything, as we've seen all the different things and that happen in our society, from George Floyd to the storming of the Capitol and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that people kept saying, whether that was a group of blacks or minorities, it would have looked different. And you heard a lot of voices that are leaders of the black community that point blank said, we don't want anybody to get shot by the police. We just want the police to give us the same liberties that they give everybody else. And that's the same thought process when we talk about when parents say, or you hear people say, well, we shouldn't be talking about anti-racism work in school. Why not? We want everybody to have the same opportunity to think critically, to think deeply, to challenge thought processes, because ultimately that's what school is all about. So when we talk about anybody that says, well, you shouldn't talk about these truths at school, well, then that's when you combat them with the conversation. Well, isn't school about thinking critically? Isn't school about challenging thought processes to say there's not one right way to teach something or one right way to learn something. Because that's what, especially with this new math that we're doing, we're showing students all the time, there's 15 different ways to come to this one answer, and you still get to the right answer. So there's different ways to do this and different ways to live a happy life. Just because Ricky is in love with Nicole doesn't mean that Ricky can't love Chris as well. If that's what makes Ricky happy, Ricky has to live that life. So, and that's what school is all about. That's what anti-racism work is all about. Challenging people to open their mindset, to challenge the status quo, to ensure, again, that everybody in the humankind is ultimately able to live out their unique truth. Because one thing that we've learned, everybody on earth is a human, but not everybody is kind. And when we get back to the place where we can combine those words and become humankind again, then and only then will we be at the point where everybody can be on that equal playing field, and we know our anti-racism work has worked.
We got about 2 more minutes, so if y'all got another question for Dr. Gibbs, throw it out to him.
Okay, I've got one in the last minute here. Dr. Gibbs, do you have any wisdom that you could shed on potentially navigating administration that is more resistant to anti-racism, or that the administration is maybe seeing those things as political? I know several of us in here work for independent schools. I work for an independent school that do you have any wisdom about navigating administration, kind of a separate piece from parents or students?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to finding ways to make the students excited. One thing, as someone that's been an administrator for over 10 years now, if as a classroom teacher, you're doing something and your students are excited about it, your parents see value in it, even if I don't like it, it's not much I can do about it, because the greater sense and the value of students and parents begin to overshadow my personal beliefs. So I would tell you, find things that you know that your students will enjoy, find things that your parents will support you on. And if you can do those things, those things will help challenge the thought process of administrators. Because as an administrator, the thing that changes our mindsets the fastest is when we see results with students or positive things from parents, because it begins to shape a conversation and culture around the school. So I would say you'll probably waste your time trying to change the thought process of the actual leader. But if you start with the students and their parents, you can create this swarm of excitement around anti-racism work.
About parents who resist the truth, could you say anything?